All right, so welcome. I am very excited about this panel. We have an extraordinary lineup, and I won't spend time here on their deeply impressive bios because you can get them on the Netroots Nation website. But in order of appearance, we have Joelle Hall, who is the president of the Alaska AFL-CIO, Regina Romero, who is the mayor of Tucson, Yulisa Elenes, who is the president of Unite Here Local 2850, the local that is organizing HelloFresh workers, and David Mertz, who is the New York City director of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. And a couple of housekeeping things. I just want to let everyone know that this panel is being recorded. And I would also like to give a huge shout out to Sarah Tarlow at Speak Welderman for her support to put on this panel. So before we get to our fantastic set of panelists, I just want to say a few words to set the stage. First, what is the PRO Act all about? The PRO Act, which actually the Richard L. Trumka PRO Act, is an absolutely transformational piece of legislation that will fundamentally change the U.S. political economy and change the balance of power between the rich and corporations and everyone else. How would it do that? It would do it by making it so an actually meaningful share of workers who want to join a union are in fact able to join a union. And it would do that by implementing a suite of reforms, including reforming the union election process, overriding so-called right-to-work laws that weaken unions, strengthening the right to strike, cracking down on misclassification, imposing monetary penalties when employers violate the law, and creating a roadmap to a first contract. So when a union does win an election, the employer can't then stall indefinitely on negotiating an actual collective bargaining agreement. But then the question arises, why is all of this needed? And the key thing is that the share of workers represented by a union dropped by more than half, from 27% to 12.1% in the last 4 decades. And that decline has been one of the single most important drivers of rising inequality and wage stagnation for most people for most of the last 4 decades. One thing about this decline was not because workers don't want to be in unions anymore. In those 4 decades, the share of non-union workers who said they would vote for a union in their workplace if they could, that share rose from 1/3 to nearly 1/2 in the last 4 decades. And the fact that workers want to be in unions is not a surprise at all. On average, a worker covered by a union contract earns 10.2% more than a similar worker who is not in a union. And union workers are more likely to have employer-provided health insurance, employer-sponsored retirement plans, paid vacation and sick leave. They have more input into the number of hours they work, more predictable schedules, and on and on and on. And then I think it's also really important to point out that the right to a union is directly relevant to our urgent national conversation around racial equity. Black workers are more likely to be in a union than white workers, and Black workers who are in unions get a larger boost from being in a union than white workers do. And those two facts together mean that unions help narrow the Black-white wage gap, and the decline of unionization has played a huge role in the expansion of the Black-white wage gap over the last 4 decades. And an increase in unionization would be a huge help to halting and reversing those trends. Another thing that I think is important to point out is that the decline in unionization in recent decades has not been, as some would like us to believe, just the natural outcome of a modern economy. It has been the direct result of fierce corporate opposition that has suppressed workers' freedom to organize. And just for one example, though the National Labor Relations Act makes it illegal for employers to intimidate, coerce, or fire workers in retaliation for organizing, the penalties are so weak that they don't provide any actual economic disincentive for illegal union busting. 1 out of 5 union election campaigns involves a charge that a worker was illegally fired for union activity. All that points to we will not see an equitable recovery without reforming labor law to restore the right to organize and bargain collectively. But right now, with the PRO Act, we actually have a real opportunity to do that. And the PRO Act passed the House earlier this year with a bipartisan vote with Republican support. But surprise, surprise, it has died in the Senate because of the filibuster. And I want to note one thing. There are some provisions in the PRO Act that are being debated in reconciliation. In particular, monetary penalties for existing unfair labor practices are in the reconciliation bill. And that is great. It is not clear whether or not they will be stripped out, but even if they stay in, and they absolutely should, it will not be enough. It will not be enough to really halt and reverse the trends of the last 4 decades. To do that, we need the full PRO Act. And for that, we need filibuster reform. And that is true for so many progressive reforms. Immigration reform with a path to citizenship, key parts of the climate agenda, voting rights. None of these are possible without filibuster reform. That means that the fate of the PRO Act and the fates of these other critical progressive reforms are just inextricably linked. And these coalitions absolutely have to work together. One thing, I'll just end by saying I'm an economist. I'm not a Senate procedural expert. But one thing I know is that there is a path forward here that only takes 50 votes in the Senate. It has been used before, including for things like executive branch nominations. And what I'll say is that if they can use it for nominations, they can use it now. We cannot squander this moment when there is potential for absolutely transformative change just because we refuse to change Senate procedures. We are at a tipping point in our economy, a tipping point in our democracy, a tipping point in our climate, and it is critical that we work together to make this happen. So on to what you have actually been waiting for, our panelists. We are going to hear 5 minutes of remarks from each of our panelists. Then I will ask the panel a few questions, and then we will open it up to Q&A from the audience. So just feel free to drop questions in the chat as we're going along. And with that, I will turn things over to Joelle Hall, the president of the Alaska AFL-CIO.
Well, good. It's actually still morning here in Alaska. Good morning, everybody. So pleasant to be with you today. Again, my name is Joelle Hall. I'm the president of the Alaska AFL-CIO. I'm going to start first by talking about what is an AFL-CIO, what is a federation. So the AFL-CIO is a federation of unions, not a union itself, meaning our membership is our constituent unions, our affiliates. Our affiliates, like some of the ones that are going to talk later on in this presentation, they do many, many things for their members, but primarily they service their members in the form of contract negotiation and grievances, but they organize, and they organize by trying to recruit new union members. And it's this organizing piece of our work that is what we are here to talk about today. Organizing is hard work in the best of circumstances, and we currently don't have the best of circumstances. We might argue we have the worst of circumstances, because what we have is a labor law that was originally written in 1935 with the Wagner Act that has been systematically manipulated, as Heidi alluded to, over the last 70 years to favor the employers at the expense of the workers. And they do that by microscopic movements over decades just to make it harder and harder and harder. They don't necessarily always have to change the law itself, they just change the penalties, as Heidi referred to. So they break the law, but nothing really happens to them. They can hold audiences captive. They can engage in power politics and intimidation of their own workers, all to try to stop a union from being organized in their workplace. Alaska, hopefully some of you have been to Alaska. Alaska kind of is one of those unique places where we have very traditional existing infrastructure that is kind of a traditional workforce. We're an oil and gas state. We're a resource extraction state. Oil and gas, mining, public services. Really, we're not on the cutting edge of the new economy. We're kind of in the old economy. And we're highly, highly unionized, especially for a place that people refer to as a red state. I tend to think of us as maroon. We're not really as red as you think we are. We're marooned. But we have old line jobs still. But the world is changing really quickly. Those old line jobs, the ones that we were able to organize from the passage of the Wagner Act to today, they are, oil and gas jobs, power plant jobs, construction, all of those, that work They fall squarely under the existing Labor Relations Act because they're traditional workplaces, organized in the traditional way with an employer who hires multiple people who do the same craft. They can form a bargaining unit. They can be represented. This notion, this basic predicate, which all labor law is structured on this predicate, this is a questionable predicate in the go forward in the modern economy. We have to have a labor law that can adapt, that can still serve many of us who work in those trades and in those jobs that kind of exist in the older model of standard employment. But we need to create a labor law that is flexible to go forward to capture the jobs of the future so that those workers have the same power to bring together their collective voice that Heidi talked about. It is exactly how you get better conditions on your job, better wages, safety. No one's giving this stuff to you for free. You have to ask for it, you have to demand it, you have to organize it. But if you're not covered by if you're not covered by the labor law, you can't organize to do it. So it is all the things Heidi said, and it's all about the future of our work too. We will always have these standard jobs, but we have to evolve. We have to evolve to capture the workforces of the future. And employers are highly innovative. Innovative meaning they're going to force as many people into the independent contractor model as they can, because then they don't have to pay unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, the other half of your Social Security. They're going to do everything they can to get you out of that employee box and into this other box to save themselves a dollar. Some people are legitimately working in that model and they really, really love it. There's nothing saying those people shouldn't be able to bring their voices collectively together. And the PRO Act does that too. The PRO Act provides this transitional way from an old workforce to a new workforce. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is Build Back Better and the infrastructure bills that are out there. We have a lot of old school work coming down the pike with this president, right? We still have bridges to fix and roads to build and schools to build and hospitals to build. And we know that we need we need that good work to be happening. Those need to be good jobs all over this country. So that is really important. We will continue to have this blend as we transition, and we need to make sure that the labor laws are keeping up with the modern face of the workforce. That's a huge part in addition to everything that Heidi already mentioned. Caleb, can you put the slide up now? We'll talk a little bit about red state union work, because I think there's a lot of perception about how people, how the world kind of divides up. And I'm doing this because I was doing a presentation to the Unitarian Universalists about the PRO Act, and our own Alaskans were stunned at how favorably unions were viewed in a purple state like ours. Here's an example of our favorability rating. This is actually kind of low. I usually get us more closer to the 60s, but this is just a standard poll. We have really high favorability. We have higher favorability than any elected official in the state of Alaska. Unions are popular here, and they're popular here because you might imagine we have a way of life that is predicated on good union jobs that we've always had. The next slide, Caleb. Our support for the PRO Act, 56%, right? This is the hard work of the Alaska Federation, the National AFL-CIO, and all of our affiliates have gotten this number. People know the good jobs are important, and that's because of the next slide, please, Caleb. Look at that, climate change, a huge issue here. You may or may not know that Alaska is the proverbial canary in the coal mine. We're moving villages right now. We are in the Arctic is the toughest place. We are feeling the effects this instant, as is now so many places. Alaskans are not oblivious to this, but they want those good jobs. So there you have a quick little view into a poll we just recently were able to do, talking about the support of the labor movement and support of PRO Act and support of these comprehensive policy issues that Heidi is referring to in our little lovely maroon state of Alaska. So can't wait to work with everybody on this call today and everybody in the audience to help pass the PRO Act. Y'all should call Lisa Murkowski. Why not? This is America's bill. This is the labor movement's bill. And Senator Murkowski is a pivotal vote, our U.S. Senator. So, hey, give her a call. Why not? Help us out. Thank you very much.
Yep, and I'm on that person on the panel who's left herself on mute. So I thank you, President Hall. I'm excited to talk more, but first we will turn to the rest of our panel, and let me now turn to Regina Romero, who is the mayor of Houston. Take it away.
Mayor of Tucson, Arizona.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
You gave me a much bigger job.
Okay, I should have kept myself on mute. Sorry.
No problem, Heidi. Mayor of Tucson, Arizona, and we moved from Alaska, which is a maroon state, to Arizona, which is a purplish, a blue hue of purple in Arizona. But I want to thank everyone for inviting me and having me with you here today. Thank you very much to Netroots Nation and the AFL-CIO for inviting me to participate in this panel. I do want to recognize that 2 months ago, the labor movement lost a titan in President Trumka. I share my sincere sympathies with the AFL-CIO and its members for that huge loss. And I am super happy and welcome the first woman to serve as the president of the AFL-CIO, Liz Schuler. For me, this discussion and passing the PRO Act isn't just a matter of adopting good public policy. It's deeply personal. I grew up in a small town of Somerton, Arizona, farm working community, daughter of immigrant farm workers. Dad worked in the lettuce fields and migrated from California to Arizona to Colorado. But he was a proud member of the United Farm Workers. And growing up in a union household, I saw the direct impact that unions had not only on the workers, but the families of the workers. Ensuring protections for workers against harmful pesticides in the fields. That is something that both Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez and the UFW worked really hard to regulate. As a matter of fact, here in Arizona, there's a joke that amongst politicos in our state, that the kids that grew up in Somerton and grew up in the fields, just breathing those pesticides that are genes really distorted and gave us our political drive. There's many of us from Somerton that are involved in the political process in Arizona, which I'll take it. I have distorted genes and I'm a glutton for punishment because of the pesticides. But, the UFW, in all seriousness, the UFW works so hard to unionize and organize what many even unions thought couldn't be organized, which were farm workers. And here in Arizona, growing up in Arizona and having 7 generations of my family that are Sonoran desert dwellers, Dolores Huerta coined her phrase, "Si se puede," in Arizona, because people would challenge her that she couldn't organize, that they could not organize in Arizona. And that's when she said, "Yes, we can, si se puede." And so 40 years later, our federal labor laws are woefully outdated and ineffective, making it increasingly difficult for workers to organize. This is especially true in Arizona, which is a right-to-work state and has many anti-union state laws that are designed with the sole intent of making it more difficult for workers to organize. And there's laws as well that make it much more difficult for cities to be able to have favorable policies towards union labor. And as we well know, when workers can't organize, they do not have a voice at the table to negotiate good wages and benefits and a safe workplace. So research shows that the decline in union membership corresponds with wage stagnation, decreased socioeconomic mobility, and the rise in wealth inequality that we have seen in the last several decades. It is also an equity issue, as Heidi talked about earlier today. Federal labor laws have been gutted by court decisions and legislative reforms in states like Arizona and Alaska, and other states throughout the country. That's why comprehensive reform of our federal labor laws is desperately needed, and that's why we must pass the PRO Act. The Protecting the Right to Organize Act restores the right of workers to freely and fairly form a union and bargain together for changes in the workplace. In its landmark worker empowerment, civil rights, and economic stimulus legislation, and an essential part of any plan to build back better from COVID-19 pandemic and the recession. It is important to remember that so many of the issues we care about dearly are interconnected, and nearly all of them face the same arcane barrier, the filibuster. We must either eliminate or significantly reform the filibuster so that we can pass the full PRO Act, pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, provide a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers, essential workers, farm workers, and TPS holders. And that's why it is critical that our movements continue to lock arms with one another in solidarity. So, Joelle said that you're all free to call Senator Murkowski, and I offer the same opportunity for you all to call our senators here in Arizona. Both Senator Sinema and Mark Kelly have been very quiet about their support for the PRO Act, and we have to, this is America's bill. This is workers and families bill. This bill will affect the infrastructure of workers and really switch and put the power again in the hands of the workers of America. So I invite you to do the same with our senators here in Arizona. It's very, very important that we pass the PRO Act, but most importantly, in order to do all of the legislative action that we must do to be able to put the power in the hands of people is reform the filibuster in the Senate.
Thank you so much, Tucson Mayor Romero. And I, again, look forward to talking more. But for now, let's turn things over to Yulisa Elenes, who is the president of Unite Here Local 2850, the local that is organizing HelloFresh workers.
Great. So thank you first of all for inviting me to participate in this panel. I'm super excited to be on this panel and tell you a little bit about the work that we've been doing to organize new workers into our union. So first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Yulisa Elenes, and I became the president of Local 2850 Unite Here, which the local is in Oakland, California. In February, I come out of the rank and file. I worked at the Oakland airport for 7 years and then participated in the program that my union does very well, which was to build committees and get trained like a shop steward to be able to help my co-workers at that time fix some of the issues that we had at the workplace. So I'm super excited to be the first Latina president of Local 2850 in Oakland. And when I was born in California, but I moved to Oakland when I was 4 years old, so I consider myself from Oakland. And my story is pretty familiar to a lot of the stories that with young women in my community. I became a young mom right after high school. And I became a single mom right after high school. So I was left to take care of a brand new baby by myself. with no support of my family. And I had to get on welfare, and also I had to provide health insurance for my son, for my baby at that time through Medi-Cal, which wasn't, we didn't get the best services, and I wasn't making ends meet. I went that first year of my son's life with the same outfit for the same year, because I could not afford to buy myself a new outfit for that first whole year. My money needed to go to formula and diapers. So I needed to find a job, even though I was getting welfare assistance. It wasn't enough. So the first job that I found was a job that was actually in my community in Oakland, at the Oakland airport, where I became a cashier. And I remember my grandpa telling me this all the time. My grandpa immigrated from Mexico, from Sinaloa. And when he immigrated here, his first job was actually a union job. He worked at Lucky's as a butcher, and was very proud of being part of the UFC for many years. So he would always tell me, if you're not going to do anything with your life, make sure that you get a union job. So that always stayed in my mind very clear. So I was super excited to tell my grandpa that I had my first job was at a union shop at the Oakland airport. And I felt really lucky to be able to have access to this job, because I wasn't able to go to college, and having a good job, especially in low-income communities, are very hard and rare to find. I worked there for about almost 7 years. And when I first started to work there, like I said, I already had a union, and I had a living wage. We had really good health insurance. So eventually I was able to get off welfare. I was able to get off Medi-Cal and provide my son with my own private health insurance that was provided by my employer, thanks to my union. And that felt really good. It felt really good being able to come home at the end of the day and knowing that I had job security, and knowing that I was going to be able to take care of my son and give him the better life that I always wanted to give him. And that wasn't the case for my brother. My brother first got incarcerated when he was about 20 years old. He's 40 years old now, and has been in and out of prison for the last 20 years of his life. And I know that if he would have had the same opportunity like I did, and had access to a good union job, he wouldn't have spent half of his life imprisoned. But when you live in a low-income community, like I said, having access to good union jobs are really hard. And I share this story with you because right now it's really hard to organize unions, and for every new job that gets created, we want to make sure that that new job that is created is a good union job, and that people are set up for success and be able to be in the same path that I did, to provide for my family. There's a lot of people that have ideas about how we could change the outcome for people of color, immigrant workers, and working class people. But let me be very clear that the solution is the PRO Act. The solution is creating good union jobs to set up people for success. So right now, my union, Unite Here, is organizing more than 1,300 workers at this meal kit company. It's called HelloFresh. And we're doing this in California, and we're doing this in Colorado. And these workers have been essential to the success of the company, especially during the pandemic when the sales of these kits exploded. My union is working with the largest HelloFresh factory, which is in Richmond, California. And frankly, to be honest, the stories I hear from workers make me very angry, because I see myself as a young worker when I was their age, just trying to make better and trying to make better for my family. HelloFresh is is a German company. They made more than $4 billion in revenue last year. And here they're nickel and diming the workers in Richmond. Many of the workers in HelloFresh, they look just like me. They're Black and brown immigrant workers who are just working really hard to take care of their families and to have success in their community. And we're hopefully that this grows and that the workers are able to make better for themselves in their lives. Workers have let the company know that they're seeking to join the union with Unite Here and join my local. I am so proud to support this fight. I know there's a lot of moms that work at HelloFresh and worry about the same things that I worried about how are you going to feed your children? How are you going to pay the rent? How are you going to pay for childcare this month? What am I going to have to go without? And I want them to feel what I felt, the freedom that I did when I found my union job. And that pride of being able to take care of your family without having to have assistance from the government. And with the union, I know that these workers are going to have a voice at work, and they're going to have basic respect and dignity. Unfortunately, HelloFresh was the site of Contra Costa County's largest documented COVID outbreak last year. Workers were getting sick and they were bringing this virus home. In addition, workers reported pain from repetitive motion injuries. These could have been preventable. And sending some workers to the hospital because of their injuries. This is so outrageous. We actually did a survey that involved 329 workers and about 1,250 workers at the Richmond and Aurora facilities, and 33% of them reported being injured at work, while 28% reporting contacting COVID last year and bringing it back to these communities that, as we all know, the Black and brown communities were the most impacted and are still the most impacted during this COVID pandemic. And these numbers really upset me because these workers package food for a living and they're not able to put food on their table. 43% of the workers surveyed report experience hunger in the past year and don't have enough money to pay for food. This is not okay. And workers get the chance to vote for Unite Here, and we're confident to be able to celebrate with you that this will be the first meal kit in the in HelloFresh company in the United States that will have a union. So this is why the PRO Act is so important, because having a union equals having a better job, literally saves your life. I'm saying this because it saved my life and it put my family's life on this new path. And how we get greater equality and stability in this society, it shouldn't be this hard to have to organize a union. Right now, the workers at HelloFresh are being forced into captive audience meetings on working times, where they have to listen to paid consultants tell them lies about the union. We know that workers are smart and that they see through this, but this is a very stressful environment because we all know that union busting is disgusting. And no one who is organizing for their lives, especially when this company is making billions of dollars, should be put through this treatment. Shouldn't be harassed, shouldn't be put in these meetings. The workers already spoke and told management that they wanted a union. But here, they're being put through this every single day, being part of these meetings that are union busting. Voting for a union in America is just your right. You shouldn't have to be going through this. We need to protect our futures for upcoming generations. We know we could do better. Instead, we're doing worse until we have and we're going to keep fighting hard and backing up these workers who fight for unions. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Thank you for listening to me today, listening to my personal story. But please go to hellofresh.org and fill out this petition. We have a petition circulating saying that you stand with workers, and to let HelloFresh know that union busting is disgusting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulisa. Your story is incredibly powerful, and we're really looking forward to hearing more. But first, let's hear from David Mertz, the New York City Director of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union.
Thank you, Heidi. I appreciate it. It really is amazing to be here with you all today. Unfortunately, the story that you just heard is a story that's way too common in workplaces across the United States. It is clearly about a huge imbalance of power between employers and workers. That's what we're talking about here. There's a basic unfairness that's going on. And, we sort of, our gallows humor is that it's like, we're not necessarily always being dealt a full deck. Sometimes not even being dealt cards in this game as union organizers, because all of the power is with the employers. And the PRO Act is seeking to address that basic imbalance and restore some fairness to our workplaces. I guess it's been over a year now, we have been organizing workers at the Bessemer facility in Alabama. That particular campaign has garnered a heck of a lot of attention. It's Amazon. It's taking place down in the South. It happened during the midst of the pandemic. And what was amazing is that for a lot of people who are not normally involved in labor and are not normally involved in union fights, they're seeing for the very first time what happens in a union organizing campaign. And I think a lot of folks were shocked by what they saw. We heard folks mention some polling that was done about the overall popularity of unions. There was actually polling done about what people felt about the Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama, seeking to form a union. And over 70% of the general public responded that they supported the effort. Republicans and Democrats alike said they supported the effort. People understand that there is a need to address this imbalance. People understand that workers are up against it and something needs to be done. And they also understand that unions are probably the best path to do that. Workers at the Amazon facility were fighting to form a union and continue to fight to form a union for a whole host of reasons. A lot of it was really brought into high relief during the pandemic. There are terrible issues about health and safety. It's physically demanding work. It's dangerous work. All too often workers are injured. Workers have died at Amazon facilities. It's unrelenting. It's a brutalizing atmosphere. And throughout it all, workers are under constant surveillance. They're monitored and measured. They're watched from the moment they walk in the door. We also heard repeatedly about this kind of dystopian atmosphere in the facility that a lot of folks may be familiar with, where workers rarely ever saw a manager. There wasn't really that much human contact. They were managed by app or on their phones. And people would get fired and they would never really have any recourse of dealing with a human being. One worker put it this way. They felt it was that they were being treated by robots as if they were robots. And it was a very dehumanizing atmosphere. So it's a pretty straightforward story, right? Workers want to have a union and they're going to form the union. I guess at this point you can sort of cue the Darth Vader music, because here comes Amazon with a very different idea of what workers may or may not need. During this campaign, Amazon, like far too many employers, did things that were well within the law to stop workers from organizing. I can't stress that enough. They were doing things, as despicable as they were, that were well within the law, a current law to do so. The messaging at the facility was constant. From the moment workers walk into the plant until the minute they leave, they are being constantly barraged with anti-union messages. Even so far as when they went into the bathroom stalls, workers would be confronted with posters about why the union was bad for them. They would have messages on their apps. One-on-one meetings with managers were far too common. And one of the things that was mentioned earlier by Ulisa was captive audience meetings. And for folks who aren't too familiar with what this means, it's kind of a bit of an antiseptic term for a pretty pernicious practice. And in a captive audience meeting, what happened at the Amazon facility, and what happens at facilities all over the United States, is that when unions try to organize, managers start herding people into classrooms for an hour at a time, several times a week, weeks at a time and just constantly hitting them with anti-union messages. I mean, it's almost to the point where folks could qualify for college credit for the amount of time they spend in these re-education classes. It's a vulgarity that I don't think we would stand for in any other place in our life. If I told you an employer was going to lock somebody in a room as a condition of their employment and listen to any other topic, whether it would be something political or whether it might even be like their favorite baseball team, you'd be outraged. You'd be like, how can they possibly do this? And yet somehow our laws allow this to take place. Under the PRO Act, this would be considered illegal. It's not just what employers can do in the context of our current broken labor law that's so problematic. They also can violate the law with pretty much impunity. It's not uncommon for workers to get fired during an organizing campaign simply because they're union supporters. Employers do this because they know that the penalties are almost non-existent. Maybe the worst case scenario is that after months of adjudication, they will finally get a worker reinstated with back pay. That's the best you can hope for. It's the cost of doing business. It's really not anything most employers worry about. And the same is true for a whole host of other violations that an employer can commit. In some ways, the worst thing that the employer can possibly have happen is that they may have to suffer through a rerun election. And currently, that's what we're anticipating is going to happen in Bessemer. That Amazon's behavior was so outrageous during the campaign that currently the Labor Board is considering having a rerun election. And we've also already gotten from the hearing officer a recommendation that that takes place. But for Amazon, that's not the worst outcome. They know that by stretching out this process, workers become discouraged. They have all the resources in the world. They've got every dollar to spend on this. They've got all the time to drag this out. And they know that undermines support for the union because people do get frustrated. So in one other example of how Amazon and other employers are able to manipulate the system, the Labor Board had a ruling on a request that Amazon made. And Amazon was asking to have a drop box on the facility for the mail-in ballots that had been established because of the pandemic. The Labor Board said, no, you can't do that because that would actually influence unduly the election. It would be a bad thing. No, this is a non-starter. So Amazon, of course, what they do is they go to the United States Postal Service and they pressure them to put in a drop box of sorts. It's called a cluster box, a mailbox like you would see in an apartment building. There are cameras everywhere for this. Workers are being told by managers that they really should use this box to mail their ballots. Workers know they're being watched. And whether or not the actuality is that Amazon knows how they're voting, there's a perception that they probably do. And there's a perception that Amazon controls the entire process. And there's a perception that Amazon doesn't even have to listen to the government when the government says you can't do something. They just go ahead and do it anyway. It creates an atmosphere where workers feel that the employer has all the power in the world. We've, of course, filed charges. I mentioned that we're hopeful that we will have a rerun election. We actually anticipate that's probably going to be the case, but it's still an uphill battle. One of the other things that we found and that you find in so many other campaigns is there becomes rumors that the plant may close if the union comes in. And while we talk about how difficult these jobs are and how they can be better and how they can and should be better compensated, in a lot of these communities, these are jobs that are full-time jobs. They pay a somewhat better wage than other jobs in the area. People are concerned about losing their jobs. And so when they hear this, they take very seriously that may be an outcome. Completely illegal. Employers are not allowed to do that. They do it all the time because they know maybe what are they going to have to do? Put a notice someplace that people will read? It's outrageous. I think the simple answer is we need a level of fairness in our workplaces. And the PRO Act is that path to get a more equal playing field for workers. It's not about advantaging unions. It's about protecting workers' rights. It's about protecting undocumented workers who are fully taken advantage of because they have no rights under current labor law. It's sickening what happens. It happens to real people. We can do something about it. We have the opportunity to do it. We have to overcome the nonsense of the filibuster. We have to work together to make it happen, not because it's good for unions, and not just because that it's good for workers, but because it's good for our communities, it's good for our country, it's good for our economy, it's the right thing to do, and it's high time that we do it. So I thank you all very much for your time, and I'll turn it back to you, Heidi.
Thank you so much, David. That was really, really riveting. And I'm going to turn to a few questions. We have 15 minutes left. So I'll just, I'll start with Paul. As you mentioned, Alaska is a state that is on one of the front edges of the climate crisis. Could you talk a little more about some of the facets of the interactions between the PRO-ACT, unions, collective bargaining, and climate reform, since we know these forces are all really intertwined? You're on mute.
It's y'all don't have to do that because I already did it. It's a great. Here's the thing. It's what Yulisa and David and the mayor have been saying. It's about the quality of the jobs, right? There is no doubt we're going to have this transition in our economy. Transition to what? We have the problem is the jobs we are transitioning away from. Coal, oil, gas. These are good jobs. They have been really good jobs for 50, 60, 70 years. And the jobs that we're headed towards right now are not good jobs. The only way they're going to be good jobs is if we have the power to bargain. The solar industry is not a really great job. It's a 15-hour, it's a low wage, minimum wage job with no benefits and no perks. These are not good jobs yet. They could be good jobs. They will only be good jobs when those workers are empowered to organize, right? And whether it is in wind or solar or batteries, wherever we're headed in the transition from where we are, unless those workers have the power to truly organize, like the people in the sectors that we're leaving did, those won't be good jobs. They will be more jobs that don't feed your family and that don't create stability in communities and don't bring dignity to the workers and the communities that they live in. It's really simple. What we're talking about and why there is such often hesitancy in states like Alaska and Montana, where you have a lot of these really great, high-paying hydrocarbon jobs, is because they're really great, high-paying hydrocarbon jobs. And the jobs you're asking them to move into, well, they're not yet, but they could be. And the PRO-ACT is the way. And if you are advocating for those industries to rise up and take the space of these other industries, and you aren't advocating for those jobs to be good jobs, you've missed the point of what the real hesitancy here is. It is about a little bit of dragging your feet because change is scary. It's really about families, and it's really about getting that paycheck and being able to survive. And we have had the 80s to watch to see what could happen if you don't do it right. You can leave yourself you can have industry upscale, leave this country full lock, stock, and barrel and devastate communities. Or we can have a just transition from the workers who are leaving an industry, and then just transition for these workers who've done nothing wrong except provide for their families, and then the power to organize these workers so that these workers represent the diversity of our country and have real jobs and they have a real voice on their job. So that's the intersection to me. We're never going to solve this really until there is a hopping off point, and those are good jobs.
That is absolutely crucial. Like this knowledge that we have that this change is coming, and it's a choice. It is a policy choice whether we make it so that people, typical workers, working people come along with those changes. It is just a crucial time right now. I often, think about, you talked about with sort of hydrocarbon jobs. I often also think about this with manufacturing. People look at those jobs and say, look, those are decent jobs. And they always want to go, they didn't used to be. They used to be terrible and dangerous and low paid. And it was unionizing that changed those jobs. And we can do it with other sectors, but we need the support of things like the PRO-ACT to make it possible. So I just think that vision in the climate space is just absolutely what we need to keep us all working together. So I thank you for that. And now I just want to turn to a state that has about as different a climate as possible as that from Alaska, Arizona. Mayor Romero, you were really key in getting the U.S. Conference of Mayors resolution endorsing the PRO Act. Can you talk about that and why you felt it was important for America's cities to really weigh in on this issue?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Heidi. Absolutely. It was very interesting. As a mayor, I get a seat at the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And we just had our summer back in August. We had our summer gathering. It was a virtual gathering, but nonetheless, we all gathered and they asked us for resolutions. And so I was like, oh, okay, let's put the PRO Act as a resolution. It's going to be easy. And we started getting pushback from chambers of commerce and industry. And I led the resolution at the U.S. Conference of Mayors with the help of Nan Whaley, who's the mayor of Dayton, Ohio. And of course, AFL-CIO National got involved. We had organizing meetings and made sure that mayors came along. It was ultimately approved unanimously by the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And the reason it's so important for mayors to take a stand is because mayors throughout the country are on the front line of policy. And we see what more than 40 years of different states trying to dismantle the right to organize and dismantle unions have done for our families. And so mayors throughout the country and through the U.S. Conference of Mayors approved the PRO Act resolution unanimously. We know that having a good high-wage, long-term, labor-friendly jobs are good for our families, right? My family, I saw the effects of a unionized job as farm workers did when the UFW organized us. We saw it, we felt it, and when we have our residents earning living wages, we see what they can provide to the family. It's actually good for our economy to have union jobs in our cities because as Yulisa's family, as her story showed us, she could provide for her child. She could pay for the needs of what her child needed. And so it's we see it at the front lines. I think it was important to make sure that mayors throughout the country stood up in support of the PRO Act. It is a landmark legislation that will restore the disempowerment that powerful corporations have pushed through different states like Arizona that are a right to work state and that do so much against workers and for corporations. So it's an important piece of a statement that mayors around the country really made specifically to let our Congress know that mayors, independent, Republican, and Democrat, support this act for our economies and for the stability of our workers.
Mayor Romero, that is amazing work. It's absolutely crucial to the success of this legislation. It's federal legislation, but the impact is about our entire country. So that work is really fantastic. And I'm going to turn to Yulisa now. Yulisa, you talked about the fact that your union, Unite Here, is currently involved in a contested organizing drive with HelloFresh. Can you tell us more about why the PRO Act would be important in efforts like that?
I mean, to begin with, it would allow workers to make their decision without being subject to these captive audience meetings every single day. They have to come to work, and on companies' time, these union busting consultants are on the shop floor with them every single day, all day, telling them how bad a union is for them and how the union just wants their dues and how the union doesn't care for them. So just all these lies that workers have to be subjected to every single day. Workers have already made their decisions. We organized, got a majority of workers to sign on cards demanding that they wanted a union. And instead of the company letting workers have this process where it's a process where they're not under attack and they're freely allowed to make the decision that they've already made to join the union. If we had the PRO Act, workers would just not be under this attack when they decide to organize and push forward to make changes for themselves and for their families in their community.
Thank you so much. Sorry that took me a long time to get off mute. You do a really amazing job of showing that this is really fundamentally about power and creating a better balance of power between workers and their employers. And it's just really, the story that you shared is just incredibly powerful. And I will now turn to David. David, you might be closing us out here. We just have a few more minutes. Can you talk to us about how the outcome of the election in Bessemer, at Amazon in Bessemer, may have been different if the PRO Act had been passed already?
Yeah, I mean, it's, don't just take my word for it, but the National Labor Relations Board hearing officer involved has already recommended a rerun election. In other words, what happened was so off the charts that the system itself is not working. I'd like to say this happens all the time, but it does not. And so someone would say, it's like, well, the system is self-correcting. No, it's not. This is unusual. It rarely happens that you will be able to prove the behavior to a point where the labor board's able to order a rerun election. And even if you do get a rerun election, as I mentioned before, you're still up against it. If this behavior that I was describing had not happened or had been curtailed, or there was some kind of level of fairness in the process, I have no doubt you would have seen a very different outcome. When over 70% of the population are supporting something, and then you take a subset of that population and do a vote, and it comes out very different from that, something is wrong. Something is out of balance. Something is happening that needs to be addressed. And I don't think there's any clearer example than what happened in Bessemer. So I like to think we can sort of, if this is kind of like ending the convo a little bit here or starting the convo for some people, hopefully, if we do make these corrections, I think we're going to see a very different kind of labor movement. And I think all of the problems that we've outlined about what happens currently and all of the hopeful things that can happen with a union voice will start coming into fruition once we get the PRO Act passed.
That's actually a great way to wrap up. It just underscores just how fundamental this is. This really will fundamentally change the political economy in the United States. It will fundamentally change the balance of power between the wealthy and corporations and basically all the rest of us, right? Like, it is just a really crucial piece of legislation, and we have a moment here where it's possible to pass it. So let's all come together and do that. And I think that with that, we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much, all of you. This has been an absolute delight. It's a wonderful panel. I'm honored to have been able to moderate it, and enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone.